The Valdrin Empire had ruled the known universe for 3,000 years. Their warships were the size of moons and their armies numbered in the trillions. They had conquered 17 galaxies and brought 1,000 different species under their control. Some species fought back and lost. Others surrendered immediately and were allowed to live as servants of the Empire. Either way, the result was always the same. The Valdrin won. They always won. Commander Zexthor stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the holographic display floating before him. The image showed a small blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants, and the dominant species called themselves humans. Zexthor had reviewed the scout reports 3 times already. The humans were primitive. They had only recently developed nuclear weapons and crude rocket technology. They were still confined to their home planet with only a few brief visits to their own moon. By Valdrin standards, they were barely more advanced than animals. The War Council had given Zexthor a single fleet for this operation. It was the smallest invasion force ever assembled for a planetary conquest. Some of the younger officers had laughed when they heard the assignment. 1 fleet to conquer an entire planet. It was almost insulting. But Zexthor understood the logic. The humans had nothing that could threaten even a single Valdrin cruiser. Their missiles would burn up against energy shields. Their primitive aircraft would be swatted from the sky. Their ground forces used chemical propellant weapons that could barely scratch Valdrin armor. This would not be a war. It would be an occupation. Zexthor gave the order and the fleet moved into orbit around Earth. Within minutes, every military installation on the planet had detected their arrival. Zexthor watched the communication channels light up with panicked transmissions in dozens of human languages. The scout teams had spent months monitoring Earth's broadcasts and had compiled a complete database of human languages and culture. The translation systems were perfect. On Earth, General Paul Henderson sat in the Situation Room deep beneath the Pentagon. The room was filled with military officers and civilian advisors, all staring at the large screens on the walls. The screens showed radar and satellite imagery of the alien vessels in orbit. There were hundreds of them. Each one was larger than an aircraft carrier. Paul had been a soldier for 30 years and had fought in 3 wars. He had seen combat in deserts and jungles and mountains. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for this. The president was on a secure video link from an undisclosed location. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady when she spoke. She asked Paul for options. Paul looked at the screens again and then back at the president. He told her the truth. They had no options. Every missile they launched would be destroyed before it reached the targets. Every aircraft they sent would be shot down. Every ship they deployed would be sunk. The only question was whether to surrender immediately or to fight and die. The president was quiet for a long moment. Then she told Paul to prepare for full military engagement. If humanity was going to fall, they would fall fighting. Paul nodded and began giving orders. Around the world, military forces went to full alert. Soldiers said goodbye to their families. Pilots climbed into cockpits knowing they would not return. Sailors manned their battle stations. Everyone understood what was coming. Lieutenant Katie Morgan sat at her console in NORAD and monitored the incoming transmissions from the alien fleet. Her hands were shaking as she typed. The aliens were broadcasting on every frequency. The message was in perfect English and dozens of other languages. Katie read the words on her screen and felt her stomach turn. The message was simple and direct. The Valdrin Empire had claimed Earth. All humans were to cease military operations immediately and prepare for occupation. Resistance would result in the complete destruction of human civilization. They had 12 hours to respond. Katie relayed the message to her superiors and then sat back in her chair. She was 26 years old and had joined the Air Force to serve her country. She had imagined fighting against terrorists or enemy nations. She had never imagined this. None of them had. The training simulations and war games had never included alien invasions. How could they? Until 3 hours ago, most people on Earth did not even believe aliens existed. Commander Zexthor waited for the human response. He expected immediate surrender. Most primitive species chose survival over pointless resistance. But as the hours passed, something unexpected happened. Instead of surrender messages, the humans began moving their military forces into defensive positions. Their warships left port and formed battle groups in the oceans. Their aircraft took to the skies in massive formations. Their ground forces dug in around major cities. Zexthor watched the tactical display with growing confusion. Did the humans not understand their situation? Did they really believe they could fight? When the 12-hour deadline passed with no surrender, Zexthor gave the order to begin landing operations. Troop transports descended through Earth's atmosphere toward major population centers: New York, Beijing, Moscow, London, Mumbai, Tokyo, Berlin. The plan was to seize control of the largest cities first. Once the major governments fell, the rest of the planet would collapse quickly. Captain Danny Wright watched the alien landing craft descend toward Washington. He stood with his Marine company in defensive positions along Pennsylvania Avenue. They had anti-tank weapons and heavy machine guns. They had training and discipline and courage. But Danny knew it would not be enough. He had seen the intelligence reports. The aliens had technology centuries ahead of anything on Earth. His men were about to fight and die against an enemy they could not possibly defeat. Danny looked at the faces of his Marines, young men and women who had volunteered to defend their country. Most of them were in their 20s. Some were barely out of high school. They deserved better than this. They deserved a fair fight. But life was not fair and war was never fair. Danny checked his rifle one last time and waited for the landing craft to touch down. The craft landed in a park 6 blocks from the White House. The massive doors opened and Valdran soldiers emerged. They were 7 feet tall and covered in advanced combat armor that gleamed in the afternoon sun. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. They moved in perfect formation like a machine built for war. Danny gave the order to fire. The street erupted in noise and smoke as his Marines opened up with everything they had. Bullets and rockets streamed toward the alien soldiers. For a moment, Danny felt hope. But then the smoke cleared and the aliens were still standing. Their shields had absorbed the entire barrage without a scratch. They raised their weapons and began firing back. The energy blast cut through concrete and steel like paper. Marines fell screaming. Buildings collapsed. Within minutes, half of Danny's company was dead or dying. Danny ordered a retreat. His surviving Marines fell back through the streets, firing as they ran. The aliens pursued them slowly and methodically. There was no hurry. They knew they had already won. Around the world, the same scene was playing out in every major city. Humanity's armies were being crushed. The invasion had barely begun and it was already over. But something was about to happen that would change everything. Something the Valdran had never encountered before in 3,000 years of conquest. Something that would turn their inevitable victory into their worst nightmare. The humans were about to show the universe what they really were. Captain Danny Wright dragged himself behind a burned-out truck and tried to catch his breath. His uniform was torn and covered in blood. Some of it was his own. Most of it belonged to his Marines. Out of the 40 soldiers he had commanded 3 hours ago, only 8 remained alive. They were scattered across 6 blocks of destroyed city, hiding in rubble and ruins, trying to survive just a few minutes longer. Danny checked his rifle. He had 2 magazines left, maybe 60 rounds. Against an enemy that could not be killed by bullets, 60 rounds meant nothing. He could hear the heavy footsteps of Valdran soldiers moving through the street. They were searching the ruins for survivors. They were in no hurry. They knew the humans had nowhere to run. Private Jake Collins lay 20 feet away behind a pile of concrete. His left leg was nearly severed below the knee. A Valdran energy blast had caught him during the retreat. Danny had dragged him to cover, but there was nothing more he could do. Jake needed a hospital and a surgeon. Instead, he was bleeding out in the street while aliens hunted them. Danny could hear Jake breathing, short gasps of pain. The kid was trying not to scream. A Valdran soldier appeared at the end of the street. The alien was scanning the ruins with some kind of sensor device. Danny raised his rifle but did not fire. One shot would give away their position and bring the entire squad down on them. Better to stay quiet and hope the alien moved on. But the alien was walking directly toward Jake's position. The sensor must have detected his life signs. Jake saw the alien coming. He tried to crawl away, but his ruined leg made movement impossible. The pain must have been unbearable, but Jake did not cry out. He reached for his sidearm with shaking hands. Danny knew what Jake was thinking. Better to go down fighting than to be captured. But a pistol would not save him. Nothing would save him. The Valdran soldier stood over Jake and raised its weapon. Danny closed his eyes. He could not watch another one of his Marines die. But then something happened that Danny would never forget for the rest of his life. Jake screamed. But it was not a scream of pain or fear. It was a scream of pure rage. Danny opened his eyes and saw Jake rising to his feet. The shattered leg was still hanging by strips of flesh and bone, but Jake was standing on it anyway. His eyes were glowing with a strange blue light. The Valdran soldier fired. The energy blast hit Jake square in the chest and should have killed him instantly. Instead, Jake staggered back one step and then lunged forward. He moved faster than any human should be able to move. His hands grabbed the Valdran soldier's armor and Danny heard metal screaming as Jake tore through it. The alien tried to fight back, but Jake was impossibly strong. Within seconds, the Valdran soldier was dead, its armor crushed and its body broken. Jake stood over the corpse and his chest was heaving. The wound from the energy blast was already closing. Danny could see the flesh knitting itself back together. The ruined leg was regenerating, bone and muscle and skin growing back at an impossible rate. Within a minute, Jake was whole again. He turned to look at Danny and his eyes were still glowing that strange blue light. Danny did not know what to say. He had just watched his Marine take a direct hit from an alien weapon and survive. He had watched Jake move with superhuman speed and strength. He had watched injuries heal that should have been fatal. None of it made sense. It was not possible. But Danny had seen it with his own eyes. More Valdran soldiers were coming. Danny could hear them responding to their fallen comrade. Jake picked up the dead alien's weapon and looked at it for a moment. Then he smiled. It was not a human smile. It was something else. Something predatory. Jake turned and ran toward the approaching aliens. Danny wanted to call him back, but the words died in his throat. Jake was no longer taking orders. Jake was no longer even human. Commander Zexthor watched the scene through his soldier's helmet camera. He saw the human rise from what should have been a fatal injury. He saw the human tear through military-grade Valdran armor with bare hands. He saw the human's wounds heal in seconds. Zexthor had conquered 100 worlds and fought against 50 different species. He had never seen anything like this. The helmet camera went dark as another soldier fell. Then another. The human was cutting through his squad like they were nothing. Zexthor immediately ordered all ground forces in that sector to pull back. He needed to understand what was happening before he committed more troops. This was not normal human behavior. The intelligence reports had said nothing about regeneration or enhanced strength. Something was very wrong. Around the world, similar incidents were beginning to occur. In Beijing, a wounded soldier named Chen Wei stood up from a pile of bodies and attacked a Valdran patrol. His hands burst into flames that burned hot enough to melt alien armor. In Moscow, a pilot named Ivan Petrov crawled from the wreckage of his jet and discovered he could move objects with his mind. He lifted a Valdran transport into the air and crushed it like a tin can. In Mumbai, a young woman named Priya Sharma found herself able to phase through solid matter. She walked through walls and disabled Valdran equipment from the inside. The reports flooded into Valdran command centers across the planet. Everywhere their forces engaged humans, some of the humans were changing, transforming, becoming something more than they had been. The Valdran officers did not understand. No species had ever developed combat abilities during an active invasion. It was impossible. Evolution did not work that fast. Dr. Lisa Patterson sat in the underground research facility beneath Area 51 and watched the reports coming in from around the world. She was not surprised. She had known this day would come. The government had been hiding the truth for nearly a century. They had known what humans really were. They had known what would happen if humanity ever faced an existential threat. Now the secret was out and there was no putting it back. Lisa pulled up classified files that went back to World War II. During the war, there had been scattered reports of soldiers displaying unusual abilities under extreme stress. A man who survived a direct artillery hit. A pilot who flew his plane with half his skull blown away. A nurse who healed patients just by touching them. The government had investigated these incidents and discovered something terrifying. Humans carried dormant genes that could activate under the right conditions. Genes that gave them abilities that defied natural law. They had called it the catalyst event. When a human experienced extreme physical or emotional trauma while facing death, something in their DNA could switch on. The process was random and unpredictable. Most people never experienced it. But for those who did, they became something more than human. Something dangerous. The government had spent decades trying to understand and control the catalyst effect. They had failed. It was too random, too chaotic. All they could do was hide it and hope it never became widespread. But now, With millions of humans facing death at the hands of an alien invasion, the catalyst events were happening everywhere. People were transforming by the hundreds, maybe by the thousands. Lisa knew the world would never be the same. Humanity had kept its greatest secret hidden for so long. But secrets could not stay buried forever. Lieutenant Katie Morgan received an emergency message from her commanding officer. She was ordered to report to a secure facility immediately. No explanation. No details. Just orders to move. Katie left her post and took a military transport to an airbase outside the city. From there, a helicopter flew her to a location she did not recognize. When she stepped out of the helicopter, she was met by soldiers in unmarked uniforms. They escorted her into an underground complex. Inside, Katie found dozens of other people. Military personnel, civilians, scientists. They all looked confused and scared. A woman in a white coat stepped forward and introduced herself as Dr. Lisa Patterson. She told them that they had been selected for a special program. She told them that the human race was changing. She told them that they could change too if they were willing. Katie did not understand what that meant. But when Lisa showed them video footage of Jake Collins tearing through Valdran soldiers, Katie began to comprehend. They wanted to turn her into a weapon. They wanted to make her into whatever Jake had become. Katie thought about her family, her parents and younger brother. They were in a shelter somewhere hiding from the invasion. If Katie did nothing, they would probably die. The Valdran were winning. Humanity was losing, but if she agreed to this, if she let them do whatever they were planning, maybe she could make a difference. Maybe she could help turn the tide. Katie looked at Dr. Patterson and nodded. She volunteered. Around the room, others were making the same choice. They were ordinary people who were about to become something extraordinary. They were about to become humanity's last hope. They were about to show the Valdran Empire that Earth would not fall easily. Dr. Lisa Patterson stood in the observation room and watched through reinforced glass as the volunteers were prepared for the procedure. 23 people had agreed to undergo controlled catalyst activation. Military personnel, emergency responders, civilians, all of them willing to risk everything for a chance to fight back. Lisa had explained the risks. Some of them might not survive. Others might survive but gain no abilities. Only a small percentage would successfully awaken. But every person in that room had chosen to try anyway. Katie Morgan sat in a medical chair and tried to stay calm as technicians attached sensors to her head and chest. The room was cold and sterile and filled with equipment she did not recognize. Dr. Patterson had explained the process. They would expose her body to extreme stress using a combination of drugs, electrical stimulation, and sensory deprivation. The goal was to trick her nervous system into believing she was dying. If her body responded correctly, the dormant genes would activate. If not, the medical team would pull her back before any permanent damage occurred. Katie closed her eyes as the drugs entered her bloodstream through an IV line. Within seconds, her heart rate spiked. Her body temperature began to rise. The technicians adjusted settings on their equipment and monitored her vital signs. Katie felt like she was burning from the inside. Every nerve in her body screamed. The pain was worse than anything she had ever experienced. She wanted to beg them to stop, but she could not form words. She could not even breathe. Then something shifted. The pain transformed into something else. Katie felt energy flowing through her body like electricity. She opened her eyes and saw sparks dancing across her skin. The metal chair beneath her began to vibrate. Lights flickered. Equipment started to malfunction. Dr. Patterson shouted orders and the technicians rushed to shut down the procedure. But Katie could not stop what was happening. The energy was pouring out of her in waves. She stood up and the restraints snapped like paper. Metal objects in the room began to float. The observation window cracked. Lisa watched in amazement as Katie's entire body glowed with electromagnetic energy. This was exactly what they had hoped for. Katie had awakened. She had become a catalyst. Lisa activated the containment P. Rotocall and a specialized field generator powered on. The electromagnetic interference immediately dampened. Katie collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The glow faded from her skin. Medical staff rushed in to check her condition. Over the next 3 days, 6 more volunteers successfully awakened. Private Ben Carter gained the ability to phase through solid objects. His molecular structure could shift between states of matter. He could walk through walls and make himself intangible to attacks. Corporal Amanda Price developed kinetic manipulation. She could absorb and redirect energy. Bullets stopped in midair around her and she could throw them back with devastating force. Sergeant Nicole Harper discovered she could sense and control electromagnetic fields just like Katie, but with even greater precision. She could disable electronic systems with a thought, but not everyone succeeded. 4 volunteers died during the activation process. Their bodies rejected the stress and their hearts simply stopped. 8 others gained no abilities at all. They endured the agony and came out the other side still human. Lisa felt each death like a knife to her heart. These people had trusted her. They had believed the program would save humanity. And some of them had paid with their lives. Around the world, spontaneous catalyst awakenings were accelerating. Every day brought new reports. A firefighter in London who could control flames. A teacher in Sydney who developed telepathy. A farmer in Brazil who gained superhuman strength. The Valdrin invasion had triggered something in the human population. Something ancient and terrible and powerful. Humanity was evolving in real time. Colonel Greg Mason received his orders directly from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was to take command of the 1st Vanguard Unit, a specialized combat team composed entirely of Catalyst-awakened soldiers. His mission was to retake territory lost to the Valdrin occupation forces. Greg had been a soldier for 25 years. He had led men in combat across 3 continents. But this was something entirely new. His soldiers were not just trained fighters anymore. They were living weapons with abilities that bordered on magic. Greg stood in the briefing room and looked at the faces of his new team. Katie Morgan was there, now able to disable enemy technology with electromagnetic pulses. Ben Carter could infiltrate enemy positions by phasing through their defenses. Amanda Price could turn the enemy's own weapons against them. Nicole Harper could jam communications and blind their sensors. Alongside them were conventional soldiers equipped with the best weapons humanity could provide. It was a strange mix of the normal and the impossible. Their first target was New York City. The Valdrin had established a major command center in Manhattan and were using it to coordinate operations across the eastern United States. Intelligence suggested approximately 2,000 enemy troops were occupying the city. Greg's force numbered only 300, but 50 of them were catalyst-awakened. The plan was to hit fast and hard, using the awakened soldiers to create chaos while conventional forces secured key positions. The transport helicopters flew low over the water as they approached the city. Greg looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. Buildings were damaged and some were burning. Valdrin ships hovered above the streets. What had once been one of the greatest cities on Earth was now an alien stronghold. But that was about to change. The helicopters landed on the roof of a building 3 blocks from the Valdrin Command Center. Greg's team moved quickly and quietly through the structure, clearing it floor by floor. They encountered no resistance until they reached street level. A Valdrin patrol was passing by. Before they could react, Amanda Price stepped forward and gestured with her hand. The energy weapons the aliens were carrying suddenly reversed direction and fired back at their owners. The aliens fell dead without understanding what had killed them. Ben Carter phased through the wall of the adjacent building and appeared inside the Valdrin position. He became solid just long enough to plant explosives on their communications equipment and then phased out again before they could shoot him. Seconds later, the charges detonated and the aliens' entire network went dark. Nicole Harper sent out an electromagnetic pulse that disabled every piece of Valdrin technology within 2 blocks. Lights went out. Vehicles stopped. Weapons failed. The conventional soldiers moved in behind the catalyst team and engaged the confused and disorganized aliens. Without their technology advantage, the Valdrin were vulnerable. Human bullets found their marks. Grenades exploded in their formations. Within 15 minutes, the enemy patrol had been eliminated. Greg's team had won their first engagement without a single casualty. News of the victory spread quickly through military channels. Other Vanguard units were being formed around the world. Countries that had been on the verge of surrender were suddenly rallying. Resistance movements were organizing. Humanity had found its weapon against the invasion. The catalyst awakened were turning the tide. Commander Zexthor sat in his command chair and reviewed the latest reports with growing horror. His forces were losing ground on every continent. The humans were no longer retreating. They were attacking. And their new soldiers were destroying Valdrin units that should have been invincible. Zexthor had requested reinforcements from the War Council, but the response had been dismissive. The council did not believe his reports. They thought he was exaggerating or incompetent. No primitive species could develop combat abilities in a matter of weeks. It was impossible, but Zexthor knew the truth. He had seen the footage. He had read the casualty reports. The humans were becoming something that the Valdran Empire had never encountered before. They were adapting to the invasion in real time. Every day more of them awakened. Every day they grew stronger. Zexthor had conquered 12 planets during his career. He had never lost a single campaign. But now, for the first time, he was beginning to believe he might lose this one. On Earth, Dr. Lisa Patterson compiled her research into a comprehensive report. She had been studying the catalyst phenomenon for decades, but only now was she beginning to understand its true scope. The genetic markers existed in every human being. Not just some people, everyone. The potential for awakening was universal. What varied was the trigger and the resulting abilities. Some people needed near-death experiences to activate. Others awakened through extreme emotional stress. The abilities themselves seemed to manifest based on individual psychology and need. Lisa included a troubling conclusion in her report. The catalyst genes were not natural. They showed signs of deliberate engineering. Someone or something had placed them in human DNA millions of years ago. Humanity had not evolved these abilities. They had been designed with them. Lisa did not know who had created humans or why. But she knew one thing for certain. Whoever had made humanity had created them to be weapons. And now, after millions of years of dormancy, those weapons were finally being used. The Battle of New York lasted 6 days and changed the course of the war. Colonel Greg Mason's Vanguard unit pushed deeper into Manhattan, block by block, clearing out Valdran positions and rescuing trapped civilians. The awakened soldiers led every assault while conventional forces secured the territory behind them. On the second day, Katie Morgan disabled an entire Valdran communications hub by channeling an electromagnetic pulse through the building's electrical system. The blast fried every piece of alien technology within a mile radius and left their forces blind and confused. Ben Carter became a ghost that haunted the enemy. He phased through walls and floors to plant explosives in places the Valdran thought were secure. He passed through their defensive barriers like they did not exist. The aliens tried to adapt by setting up motion sensors and heat detectors, but Ben had learned to phase his entire body, including his heat signature. He was invisible to their technology. By the fourth day, Valdran troops were afraid to stay in enclosed spaces because Ben might appear from nowhere and kill them. Amanda Price turned the streets into death traps for enemy patrols. Every weapon they fired came back at them. Every grenade they threw reversed course in midair. She could sense kinetic energy in all its forms and manipulate it with precision. When a Valdran gunship fired missiles at her position, Amanda caught them with her power and sent them spiraling back into the ship. The explosion lit up the sky and debris rained down on the city. The surviving crew members ejected, but Amanda was already redirecting their escape pods into the side of a building. Nicole Harper coordinated the entire operation from a mobile command center. Her ability to sense and manipulate electromagnetic fields gave her awareness of every electronic device in the city. She could track Valdran movements by monitoring their communications. She could predict their attacks by sensing the power buildup in their weapons. She fed tactical information to Greg in real time, and he used it to outmaneuver an enemy that had superior numbers and technology. The Valdran were fighting blind while the humans could see everything. By the 6th day, the Valdran forces in Manhattan were surrounded and cut off from reinforcements. Commander Zexthor ordered a full retreat from the city, but it was too late. Greg's forces had secured all the bridges and tunnels. The Valdran transport ships that tried to evacuate troops were shot down by human anti-aircraft batteries, nearly a thieves. Aus and alien soldiers were killed or captured. The rest fled on foot into the surrounding areas where they were hunted down by resistance fighters. The victory sent shockwaves through both sides. Human military forces around the world took inspiration from New York and launched their own counterattacks. In London, a vanguard team led by Captain Henry Stone retook Parliament. In Tokyo, Major Kenji Yamamoto pushed the Valdran out of the city center. In Paris, Lieutenant Marie Dubois used her ability to control metal to tear apart alien war machines. Everywhere, humanity was pushing back. The Valdran War Council convened an emergency session. Commander Zexthor was brought before them in chains. They accused him of incompetence and cowardice. They said he had failed to properly assess the enemy and had wasted valuable military resources. Zexthor stood before the council and told them the truth. The humans were not like other species. They were changing, evolving, developing abilities that should not be possible. The invasion had triggered something in their genetics, and now they were becoming unstoppable. The council members dismissed his claims as excuses. They had reviewed the reports and concluded that Zexthor had simply encountered a small number of humans with natural psionic abilities. Every species had a few individuals with unusual talents. It was nothing that superior Valdran technology could not overcome. They assigned 3 more fleets to the Earth invasion and ordered Zexthor to be imprisoned until the campaign was complete. Then they would decide his punishment, but some members of the council were not convinced. Grand Admiral Kethral had been reviewing classified xenoarchaeology reports from the Valdran Science Division. Years ago, their researchers had discovered ruins on a dead planet in a distant galaxy. The ruins contained warnings about something called the Architect War. According to the fragmentary records, an ancient civilization had fought against an invasion from outside known space. That civilization had created weapons to fight the invaders, biological weapons, living weapons that could adapt and evolve to counter any threat. Kethral presented his findings to the council, but they rejected his theory. The idea that humans were artificial creations designed millions of years ago was absurd. Kethral was ordered to stop wasting time on ancient history and focus on the current war. But privately, Kethral continued his research. He requested access to captured human prisoners and began running genetic analyses. What he found confirmed his worst fears. On Earth, Captain Danny Wright stood in front of a holding cell and looked at the Valdran prisoner inside. The alien sat on a metal bench with its hands bound. Its armor had been removed and it wore simple prison clothing. Danny had been assigned to interrogate the prisoner with the help of a translator device. The prisoner's name was Velkoth, and he had been a soldier in the Valdran military for 30 years. He had fought in campaigns across 5 galaxies and had never been captured before. Danny asked Velkoth why the Valdran had invaded Earth. The alien looked at him with eyes that showed no emotion. Velkoth said the Valdran invaded because that was what they did. They conquered and absorbed other species. It was their nature, their purpose. Danny asked if the Valdran had ever failed to conquer a world. Velkoth was silent for a long moment. Then he said that the Valdran had never failed. Not once in 3,000 years. Until now. Danny asked what Velkoth thought about the humans. The alien's expression changed slightly. It might have been fear or respect or something else. Velkoth said the humans were unnatural. No species evolved the way humans were evolving. No species gained abilities during a war. It violated every principle of biology and genetics that the Valdran understood. Velkoth believed that humans were not a natural species. He believed they were created. Danny did not know what to make of that statement. He asked Velkoth to explain. The alien told Danny about the ruins that Valdran scientists had found, about the warnings left by an extinct civilization, about biological weapons designed to fight a war that had ended before the Valdran Empire even existed. Velkoth said that Grand Admiral Kethral believed humans were those weapons, sleeping weapons that had finally been activated. Danny left the interrogation room and immediately reported the conversation to his superiors. The information made its way up the chain of command until it reached Dr. Lisa Patterson. Lisa read the report 3 times and felt her blood run cold. She had suspected the catalyst genes were artificial, but she had not known why they existed. Now she had a possible answer. Humans were weapons, created by someone, for some purpose. And that purpose was apparently war. Lisa compiled all the data she had gathered over the past months. The genetic markers, the awakening patterns, the variety of abilities, the information from the Valdran prisoner. She wrote a comprehensive report and sent it to every major government on Earth. The report concluded with a simple statement. Humanity was not a naturally evolved species. They were artificial constructs designed for combat. The catalyst abilities were not a mutation or a disease. They were features, deliberate design elements meant to activate when humans faced existential threats. Lieutenant Sophie Grant sat in the cockpit of her fighter jet and prepared for launch. She had awakened 3 weeks ago during a dogfight with Valdran aircraft. Her plane had been hit and was going down. In that moment of certain death, something in her mind had opened up. Suddenly, she could interface directly with her aircraft's computer systems. She could process information faster than any machine. She had regained control of the damaged plane and not only survived but shot down 3 enemy fighters. Now Sophie could fly better than any pilot in human history. She thought in 3 dimensions. She calculated trajectories and angles without conscious effort. Her reaction time was measured in milliseconds. When she flew, she and the aircraft became a single entity. Military engineers had modified her jet to take advantage of her abilities. They removed the standard controls and installed a direct neural interface. Sophie could control every system with her thoughts alone. Her squadron lifted off from the carrier and headed toward a Valdrin fleet position off the coast. The enemy had deployed fighter screens to protect their capital ships. For weeks, human aircraft had been unable to break through. But Sophie was about to change that. She accelerated to maximum speed and dove into the enemy formation. Her mind tracked 18 enemy fighters simultaneously. She fired missiles and guns in a precisely choreographed sequence. Targets fell from the sky before they knew they were under attack. The other pilots in her squadron followed her lead. Together, they carved through the Valdrin fighters and reached the capital ships. Sophie designated targets and her squadron launched their anti-ship missiles. The Valdrin point defense systems tried to intercept, but Sophie jammed their targeting computers with electronic warfare. The missiles struck home and 3 enemy cruisers exploded. The remaining Valdrin ships broke formation and retreated. Humanity had won control of its own skies. Around the world, the pattern repeated. Awakened humans were leading successful operations against Valdrin forces. The tide of the war was turning. The aliens who had conquered 17 galaxies were losing to a species they had thought primitive, and every day more humans awakened to their true nature. 6 months after the invasion began, Commander Zexthor stood in chains before the War Council for the 2nd time. But this time the council members were not angry. They were terrified. The Earth campaign had become a complete disaster. 3 entire battle fleets had been destroyed or captured. Hundreds of thousands of Valdrin soldiers were dead. Dozens of capital ships had been lost. And worst of all, the humans were winning. Grand Admiral Kethrel presented his findings to the council. He showed them genetic analyses of human DNA. He showed them the ancient ruins and the warnings left behind. He showed them mathematical models that proved humans could not have evolved naturally. The conclusion was undeniable. Humans were engineered weapons created by an extinct civilization to fight a war that had ended billions of years ago. The Valdrin invasion had simply reactivated them. The council members listened in silence. When Kethrel finished his presentation, they asked the obvious question. If humans were weapons, what were they designed to fight? Kethrel displayed images from the ancient ruins. The fragments of records spoke of invaders from outside the known galaxies, beings that existed in dimensions the Valdrin could not perceive, entities that consumed entire civilizations. The ancient creators had built the humans as an answer to that threat. They had encoded them with the ability to adapt to any enemy, to develop whatever powers were needed to survive and counter any attack. The council voted unanimously to withdraw all forces from Earth immediately. They issued a galaxy-wide warning. Earth was to be quarantined. No species was to make contact with humans under any circumstances. The risk was too great. If humanity continued to awaken and evolve, they might become more dangerous than the original threat they were designed to fight. The Valdrin Empire had survived for 3,000 years by knowing when to fight and when to retreat. This was a time to retreat. Dr. Lisa Patterson stood in the laboratory and examined the latest genetic data. She had been working with scientists from every nation on Earth to understand what humans really were. The evidence was overwhelming. Every human carried identical genetic markers that did not match any natural evolutionary pattern. The markers were artificial, designed. Someone had taken a primitive primate species millions of years ago and modified it. They had turned it into something that could survive anything. Lisa thought about the implications. Every human ability that seemed exceptional was actually designed. The capacity for language, the ability to use tools, the social structures, the creativity and innovation, all of it was engineered. Humans were not the result of natural selection. They were products, built for a specific purpose, and that purpose was war. Captain Danny Wright sat across from Velkoth one final time. The Valdrin prisoner was being released as part of the withdrawal agreement. Danny asked him what he would tell his people about Earth. Velkoth said he would tell them the truth, that humans were the most dangerous species in the universe, that they should never be disturbed. that the ancient creators had built something terrible and beautiful, and it was sleeping on a blue planet in a quiet corner of space. Danny asked if the Valdrin would ever return. Velkoth shook his head. The Empire had added Earth to the list of forbidden worlds. There were only 3 other planets on that list. Dead worlds where entire civilizations had been wiped out by forces the Valdrin could not understand. Now Earth joined them, not because it was dead, but because it was too alive. Colonel Greg Mason led his vanguard unit in the final assault on the last Valdrin position on Earth. The enemy had retreated to their command ship in orbit and were preparing to leave. Greg's team boarded the ship using captured Valdrin transport craft. They fought through the corridors against the remaining defenders. Katie Morgan disabled the ship's weapons systems. Ben Carter phased through bulkheads to sabotage the engines. Amanda Price deflected every shot the aliens fired. Nicole Harper jammed their communications. Within 2 hours, the command ship was secure. The surviving Valdrin crew surrendered. Greg stood on the bridge and looked at the command chair where Zexthor had sat. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the victory felt strange. They had defeated an empire that had conquered galaxies. They had done it in 6 months. What did that say about what humans really were? President Linda Hayes addressed the United Nations and the world. She stood at the podium with military leaders and scientists behind her. She told the truth. The whole truth. Humans were not a natural species. They were created as weapons by an ancient civilization. The catalyst abilities were not mutations. They were designed features meant to activate during existential threats. Humanity had lived for millions of years without knowing what they really were. Now they knew. The reaction was mixed. Some people felt betrayed. Their entire understanding of human history and identity had been a lie. Others felt empowered. They were descendants of something greater than they had imagined. Religious leaders debated what this meant for faith and spirituality. Scientists scrambled to revise their theories. Philosophers argued about free will and purpose. The world would never be the same. Sergeant Nicole Harper stood on the observation deck of the captured Valdrin command ship and looked down at Earth. The planet looked peaceful from orbit. Blue oceans and green continents, white clouds. It was hard to believe that this world had produced warriors capable of defeating a galactic empire, but the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had won. Nicole thought about her own abilities. She could sense and control electromagnetic fields. Where had that power come from? Some ancient engineer had written it into her DNA millions of years ago. They had planned for this. They had known that someday humanity would face a threat and would need to fight back. They had prepared humans for war before humans even existed. The thought was both comforting and horrifying. Katie Morgan joined Nicole at the window. She asked Nicole if she regretted volunteering for the Catalyst program. Nicole thought about the question. She had nearly died during activation. She had gained powers that made her different from normal humans. She could never go back to being who she was before. But she had also helped save the world. She had fought and won against impossible odds. Nicole told Katie she did not regret it. Katie nodded. She felt the same way. The captured Valdrin technology was being studied by human engineers. They were reverse engineering everything they could, faster than light engines, energy weapons, advanced materials. Within a few years, humanity would have the capability to leave their solar system and explore the galaxy. They would join the community of spacefaring species. But they would not be welcomed. The Valdrin had sent their warning to everyone. Earth was dangerous. Humans were weapons. Dr. Lisa Patterson wrote the final section of her comprehensive report. She included all the data and all the conclusions. Humans were artificial. They were created for war. The catalyst abilities were just the beginning. As humanity faced new challenges and threats, more abilities would probably emerge. There was no way to know what the original creators had encoded in human DNA. The potential might be limitless. Humans might be able to adapt to anything. Lisa ended her report with a warning. Humanity needed to be careful with its new power. The catalyst abilities were dangerous. People with these powers could cause massive destruction if they lost control. Society would need to adapt. Laws would need to be written. Training programs would need to be established. Humans had to learn to live with what they were. They had to accept their nature without letting it consume them. Commander Zexthor sat in his cell on the Valdrin homeworld and waited for judgment. He had lost the Earth campaign. He had failed the Empire. The Council would probably execute him as an example, but Zexthor did not care about his fate anymore. He had seen something that changed his entire understanding of the universe. He had seen a species that could evolve in real time, that could develop godlike powers when threatened, that could defeat enemies with technology thousands of years more advanced. The humans terrified Zexthor more than anything he had encountered in 30 years of military service. Not because they were cruel or evil, but because they represented something that should not exist. They were proof that somewhere in the distant past, someone had needed to create the perfect weapon. And they had succeeded. They had built a species that could survive anything, fight anything, defeat anything, and then they had left that species on a quiet planet to sleep until it was needed. Zexthor wondered what the original creators had been fighting. What threat had been so terrible that they needed to build humans to counter it? And more importantly, was that threat still out there somewhere? The ancient records spoke of invaders from beyond the known universe, beings that consumed galaxies. If those beings ever returned, humanity would wake up fully. They would become what they were truly designed to be. And Zexthor suspected that even the Valdran Empire at the height of its power would seem insignificant compared to what awakened humans could accomplish. The humans had won their freedom. They had claimed their place among the stars, but they had also learned the terrible truth about themselves. They were not explorers or dreamers or builders. They were weapons, created by someone else for someone else's war, and that knowledge would haunt humanity for the rest of its existence. Every human would have to live with the question of what they really were and what they might become. The blue planet that looked so peaceful from space held the most dangerous species the universe had ever seen, and they were only just beginning to wake up.